Welcome to the Allo.Capital podcast. If you're just joining us, we're doing seasons. This season, we're summoning Allo.Capital, a new spinout from Gitcoin that is designed to build the capital allocation layer of the tokenized internet. We believe there's big upside here. Capital allocation is a multi-trillion-dollar design space. VCs, governments, NGOs, DAOs, and regular people all have to allocate capital. But it's also a place where we can start small. Every time you spend money, you are allocating capital. We are threading a through line, partnering with builders, researchers, and funders to figure out what on-chain capital allocation looks like and building it on-chain. If you want to learn more, visit our website at Allo.Capital, where you can download the Allo books for free, play with some of our dApps, join the Telegram, or participate in the ecosystem. All right. Today, I am playing a recording of a Twitter space that the Gitcoin account held last week, in which we talk about some of the bold capital allocation experiments that are happening in GG23, Gitcoin's 23rd carnival of Web3 funding, where we fund what matters to the Ethereum ecosystem. On this episode, we are going to play the Twitter space in which we go into two bold new experiments in AI capital allocation. In this episode, you will hear about those bold experiments and what makes them bold, why I'm excited about those. But also, I encourage you to take a look at how Gitcoin is evolving from being just quadratic funding to being a multiple mechanism selling point for different builders in the space to do innovative ways of funding what matters in the Ethereum ecosystem. So if GG1 was all about quadratic funding and GG23 is quadratic funding, retro funding, and a handful of bold experiments around AI capital allocation, I can't wait to see what GG24 and GG25 and the future of a pluralistic set of mechanisms for funding what matters in the Ethereum ecosystem looks like. And it's a great joy to be at the epicenter of making this all happen with Gitcoin and stewarding Gitcoin, but also Allo.Capital is working to stimulate the multi-mechanism future of Gitcoin. So I think you're really going to enjoy this episode. Without further ado, I give you the Twitter space hosted by Matilda, the grants program lead at Gitcoin, and then featuring Devansh, Mehta, and David DAO, who are ecosystem builders who are working on the mechanisms. Enjoy.
GM, welcome. Maybe we can kick off while we are still waiting for a few more people to join us. And if you are part of the space, please like, share, retweet, whatever you gotta do to get more people into the space where we're going to be discussing all the experiments. Well, some of the experiments that we ran alongside GG. Yeah, super excited. Maybe we do a quick round of intros and then we can get started. For those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Matilda. I'm grants program lead at Gitcoin. Yeah, super excited for this conversation today. David, I'll hand it over to you next.
Hi, thanks a lot for the invite. I'm David Dahl. It's my real name. And I'm the chief scientist of Gainforce now. And also, we are running right now a really cool DeepGov experiment with eval science. And I think that's something we'll not tell you about later. And maybe give it to Carl.
Thank you, David. My name is Carl. I work with Allo.Capital as a developer and also working with David on this really cool new experiments running on GG23. So yeah, and thanks everyone, and sending it to who's next?
Why don't we hand it over to Devansh next?
Hey there, great to be here. And along with Bill, we did like a cool predictive funding challenge where AI models had to guess how much money projects would get in the round before it even started. And it's been really cool just seeing the error rate and how close model submissions were actually to kind of calculating. So I'll hand it over to Bill next. Yeah.
Thanks, Devansh. And hi, everyone. Yeah, this is Bill from Pound. We're hosting this competition on predicting how much funds the projects will receive in GG23. It's a very fun experience. We have I think we have dozens of models submitted, and it's fun to see how their performance changes in real time as the funding started.
Amazing. Super excited to dig into all of that. Day, I'll hand it over to you next.
Nice. Hey, my name is Day. I'm the grants program coordinator at Gitcoin, and I'm just super excited to dive in with the audience and kind of learn more about all of these incredible experiments that are happening.
Amazing. And last but definitely not least, Wookie.
Hey, what's up? I'm Kevin Iwaki. I'm one of the original co-founders of Gitcoin, and 8 years later, we're still cooking, still trying to figure out how to fund what matters. It's been an adventure over 23 rounds, and Gitcoin is evolving once more. And I've been really excited to see as we go from quadratic funding to multi-mechanism, what kind of cool signal generation we can create and what kind of cool capital allocation we can create to solve Ethereum's biggest problems and to fund what matters in the year 2025. So let's get into it.
Amazing. Let us definitely get into it. Okay, so first of all, I just wanted to give a quick TLDR on what GG23, you kind of preempted this as well, Awaki, so thank you for that. GG23 was a really, like, the whole of GG23 was actually an experiment, you know. We moved from purely quadratic funding in our own program to a multi-mechanism future within our OSIS program, and we saw also a ton of mechanisms coming out of the community rounds this round as well. I'm so proud to see this round come to life. It's been months and months of strategizing and figuring it all out, and it's been a really big moment to actually just see it in, you know, come to life. And yeah, super excited. One of the other things that we also really wanted to push forward was this air of experiments within funding, but also what kind of side quest experiments almost can we see come up. And two that we're going to be discussing today is, like our speakers already mentioned, was the DeepGov experiment as well as the predictive funding. This kind of ran side by side to both to the GG23 rounds, which is super exciting. Yeah, and let's get into it. I don't want to hear too much of my own voice in this space, so definitely we'll open it up to the floor. So I want to throw it over to predictive funding first. Devansh, I'll hand this over to you. You know, can you just give us an overview of what was the goal around this challenge? This did come in as a GCP to our forum. Gitcoin is also co-funding this. So yeah, super excited to hear. Can you just give like an overview of what the goal was, how it's going, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, so basically I got hired at the EF sometime around February in early Feb to look at how AI can be used for capital allocation. And kind of one of the biggest challenges in using AI for allocation is accountability. That how do we even know that the AI is good? Are we just like YOLOing the money into an AI which might not be very like kind of it might not be the best AI, it might not perform the best. So kind of the like we've been taking like a data science competition approach, something like Kaggle, where you have ground truth data and we see like and many people submit an AI model and then we can actually rank the AI saying this is number one because it's most closely aligned with the ground truth data and this is number two. And the first challenge we ran was based on past Gitcoin and Octant and Optimism and open collective funding data, where we kind of relied on an honor system that even though this data is available publicly, like build a model that predicts the funding which projects would have got in the past, and we will judge you based on your write-ups in the forum. So we got around 21 good submissions there and like an error rate of 0.025 was like the winning model. And this is going to be important and I'll come back to it. So, and like the biggest feedback we got from model people was that we don't want jurors judging and giving prizes. We want it to be purely based on the error rate and the leaderboard placement. So that's when we saw this kind of very brief window of time where applications ended and 36 hours later, the GG23 round starts. So we basically, like in those 36-hour window, you can make a prediction of how much funding each project is going to get in the round. And we just ran it, like we did it for 36 hours and we got about 11 or 12 good submissions, which is honestly more than which was more than what I was expecting. And currently, like the QF payouts are still left, so that's going to determine the final leaderboard placement. But currently, I think there's an error rate of around 0.034 or something. So when the past data was like fully known, it was 0.026. Here it's 0.034. And if you just guess randomly, it's like something like 0.045. So we've seen like some kind of things. Hopefully the error rate comes down much lower. And the kind of larger motivation, and I'll end it here, the larger motivation is that if the error rate becomes low, it basically means that we don't need to run these QF rounds anymore. We can just ask, like if a new project comes and we want to figure out how much money to give this new project, we can just ask the top performing AI that how much would this project have got if it had taken part in the QF round? And we would get like a decent approximation of that. So I think that's what kind of the larger, like the longer excitement about it is. And it's also just a really cool challenge for a lot of like AI people. So we've seen really good submissions and we're getting the community activated and involved. So it's also about how we make the crypto space cool for AI and not just the AI space cool for crypto, which is what we are seeing right now.
Yeah, super exciting. Bill, anything you want to add there?
Sure. I think, yeah, I just want to add, first add some like interesting things that happened in the preparation of this competition. I think, we started like actually quite late. So I think, you, I, and Devansh had a meeting probably on Monday or something like that. And then we have this competition out on Tuesday or something in 24 hours. That's definitely a good experience to have. But we made it. We got everything sorted out and started competition. As Devansh said, it's unexpected to have so many to receive, so many submissions in just a very short time window. So I guess one thing I probably want to add is, we also learned a lot of lessons right from doing this in such a short period of time. Of course, there's some hiccups along the way. So I guess, if there's another round, if we were to do it again, we will definitely be more prepared and give a even better experience to the developers. But I think that's one thing I want to add. And another thing is like, probably people might be wondering, right, what's ultimate goal? So I think one goal is, what Devansh just said, right, is to maybe help with the QF funding, the QF round. And then another thing, I think probably the ultimate goal is, as, Vitalik, wrote in his post earlier, which is to basically trying to scale human judgment, right? So if think about in the future where we have just so many things we want to fund or we want to support, and then it's very hard to get people to vote on every one of them, or it's even hard for people to discover all of them. So maybe this is where we can use AI to help, right? Help people discover projects better and also help them understand the project better. And also on the flip side, maybe we don't need to really, go like 100% aligned with what the model predicts. Maybe when we see like the discrepancy between what the model predicts and what people, actually do, maybe we can, find some insights there as well, to maybe to figure out, is there a hidden gem there that's, kind of overlooked by people, but then the AI picked it up, or maybe, AI, saw something else in that project that's worth looking at. Maybe AI don't think that project should be funded that much. Then it's also an interesting case to look at too. So I think, yeah, there are many use cases, or many things we can use AI in the future if we, get this thing right.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. I love that piece around project discoverability as well, because that's something that it's part of a lot of feedback that we've gotten, with our QF rounds. I mean, if you just look at the OSS program, we usually have over 200 projects participating. And especially if you're coming in brand new, it's project discoverability can be really tricky. So I love any kind of other aspect of just increasing how we discover projects in a round. Awaki, I know you're super excited and like super bullish on all these types of things. I'd love to hear your feedback as well. And how do you think this went? What you're excited about as well, and then we can dive into DeepGov a little bit as well.
Yes, I mean, I'm really excited about Gitcoin going multi-mechanism more broadly. And, I think the mission of Gitcoin is about funding what matters, and specifically funding what matters to the Ethereum ecosystem as sort of our core constituency. And I think that we were solutionist for too long, just trying to figure out a way that we could wedge quadratic funding into everything. And I think that ran its course. We found some great designs for quadratic funding and really helped solve quadratic funding's biggest problems through doing that. But now is the time to take a fresh look at how capital allocation can be done on chain in 2025. And AI is just wow. The combination of permissionless global programmable blockchains with large language models and commodified intelligence that can be allowing people to signal their preferences for where they want the money to go in a very minimalistic way, or using existing metadata exhaustion where they don't even have to put in new data, and the AI can come up with new ways to represent the people's will. I just think that that's such an incredible design space. And I think of the predictive funding experiment that we did in GG23 as just sort of the first pilot of how can we use this in order to do better capital allocation. And honestly, it gives me GG1 vibes. In January 2019, we did our first pilot of quadratic funding. We had no idea if it was going to work. And we learned a lot by just doing the first case study and getting that empirical data of how it worked. And so I'm excited about the results. I think that this was definitely a successful experiment. And I think that the real question that I want to orient people towards is, what do we do for GG24, knowing what we've learned in GG23? What are the ways that we could remix these experiments or these mechanisms or extend them in such a way that we learn even more about how to solve these problems? So that's all I'll say for now. I'll probably have more comments after we get into the next experiment.
Yeah, I love all of that. This is super exciting. I know, Devansh, you came off mute. I do have another question for you before we go to DeepGov, but maybe I'll allow you to comment and then I'll give you my question.
No, I was responding to Awaki's prompt about how we should leverage some of these experiments for GG24. And something which I'm personally quite keen on solving is like the issue that projects have to apply in order to receive funding, or like, what I've jokingly called the only crying babies get fed problem. And like, now that we have a couple of models submitted already, what I really love is getting an eligibility set of all pools that are valuable to Ethereum, and then just applying some of the winning models to those repos which haven't even applied for funding, and kind of just giving money to them directly without even them applying. So kind of really moving beyond this system where, you have to apply and then only you get money, towards like seeing who is giving value to Ethereum and being able to use some of these AI models submitted to actually just directly airdrop them some of the value that they're creating.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I think there's definitely that's a two-sided argument, right? Like I've also heard people say that, well, if you want funding, you got to put in a little bit of work. But I also know for builders in the space, it is really exhausting to navigate all the grant opportunities out there. So that is something that's been really top of mind for me as well. How do we also at the builder level solve a lot of these problems? So that's why I'm excited about all of this as well. Before we go to DeepGov, Devansh, what you said was really interesting, that, the future that you look at here as well is how can something like this even replace quadratic funding in the future? I'm curious from your perspective, what do you think needs to be true for us to actually get to that place? Do we need to run a few experiments over a few rounds before we move completely away from quadratic funding? I'm curious what your thoughts are there.
Yeah, so I think maybe Bill can be like a good person to comment because he used to be a statistics professor, so he kind of knows some of this well. But what needs to be true is basically the winning model predicting the funding to projects has a very small error rate. I don't know how small, like Bill can comment on it. So maybe Bill, you can just comment a little bit about like what is the error rate that model should ideally have before kind of we know that it's a decent approximation of QF results.
Yeah, that's a really hard question. So yeah, so I guess the error rate itself, without putting like a context or units around it, it's hard to like say how good it is, right? But in general, I think um you asked a good question, which is right. How many experiments do we need before we can say that this thing's ready, right? I think we definitely want this is more, just as any scientific experiment, one experiment is, you always want more experiments, right, to increase your statistical significance. But I guess, in this case, in the AI era, it's probably more like, we're not like, doing like drug design, right, where we need like to have a million of people, trying the drug, and we just need to find a significance level or p-value of 0.001 to be sure that the drug is working. So in this case, I guess we can start from the current experiment we have done with the start with the model we currently have, and I think it will be more interesting to see how general those models are. So which means we can apply the models to other grant allocation events or scenarios, right? And see, if those models really generalize. And in that case, I think that's probably more important than what the specific error rate is. Then we can gradually, improve, try to optimize the error rate, right? By, adding more data or improve the model. But I think the first step is just to see, if this idea even works under the current technology. But I think, yeah, I'm optimistic about it because, based on what we have seen now, right, the AI is very good at, reading all those texts and, even reading code to understand what those, projects are doing. And then together with all the behavioral data, right, like, how people rate those things, how many stars we get on GitHub, all this, et cetera, et cetera. And we can get a good amount of a good ratio of signal to noise ratio, right, and to make a good judgment. And then eventually I think we probably need quite a few experiments just to really say if we nailed it or not. But I think we're on the right track. Maybe the next experiment we can solve this problem. Maybe we need more, so let's see.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, definitely makes sense to run a few more experiments, before we shift to a goal like that. Okay, let's dive into DeepGov. I'm going to hand it over to you next, David. Can you give a, quick, this was also an incredibly quick turnaround time. So just hats off to both teams that have been working on both of these experiments. Really, really amazing to see such quick turnaround times. But I mean, that's the AI of experiments, right? Like we're building in public and we're building as we're going. So yeah, David, can you give us a rundown of DeepGov? What was the goal of this experiment, how it's going, and anything else that's been standing out to you?
Yeah, totally. And thanks so much for giving me the opportunity to talk about that. Definitely very quick turnaround time wouldn't be possible without Ka and Sejao, who couldn't be here today. Like, we totally want to run some tiny experiments to get as much data as possible. And I think Devansh and I are very aligned in that we are more executors and like, okay, let's just run it and let's see what comes out. And then we use the scientific method and then we reiterate and run it again. DeepGov is, in many ways, we call it a friendly fork of deep funding. So it's inspired by when Sejao, Devansh, and Ka and I, we were talking to Audrey Tang, the former digital minister of Taiwan, the other day, and talking about deep funding. She actually asked a really good question, which is like, okay, can these AI models, can they also teach the humans back, right? And that reminded me a little bit of, remember in AlphaGo when the machine was beating all the Go competitors? And not only that, Go Masters, AlphaGo did this move 37, which is really famous. You can look it up. It's like this creative move no one ever came up with. No human could do this. It's a machine doing this and teaching, like, all the human players who have been doing this for centuries or thousands of years. This Go is the oldest game in the world, one of the oldest ones. Teaching a new move is quite stunning. And we wanted to see, is that possible also for kind of funding, right? Like, can a machine teach us, for example, new metrics that we hadn't even thought about, new values, new considerations? So we came up with this idea of, inspired by Audrey, and also a use case in Japan where Takahiro Ano, a Japanese newbie running in politics, he used an AI avatar to basically co-design a value manifesto, but let everyone, all the citizens, run in. And then he had an AI avatar trying to convince all the citizens to vote for him based on these value sets, right? And we thought, okay, can we have something similar also for DeepGov, which is basically configurable AI politicians that are gonna take a certain kind of fund of money, and they are gonna decide how this money is gonna spend according to a certain kind of value set and principles they believe in. And this value set is completely configurable. It's transparent. It's open for everyone to change if people are unhappy with. And the way we steer these AI models is by election. So people can look at these principles. So DeepGov is free specific AI models right now, but it could be N. So it could be anyone who would fork it and like add a new candidate if they're unhappy. But right now it's free models. We call them lovingly Luna, the open source capitalist, Grant, the Gitcoin communist, and Panda, the regenerator. And those three are not random. Before we started the election round, we had a 2 weeks intensive broad listening period, also inspired by Audrey's amazing work. So what broad listening is basically listening, collecting data from all the stakeholders. We created, for example, the Gitcoin forum. We had a Polis survey result. And then we defined exactly 3 opinion groups. So this was very stunning. So we had 19. So we started with 10 questions. Then people could submit more questions on the values and principles of public goods funding. And turns out there are 3 kind of opinion groups that tend to answer similar questions similarly, right? And from these 3 opinion groups, we crafted the constitutions of those 3 AI models, Luna, Panda, and the communist Grant. And now these 3 models are competing for your votes to distribute 25K of like extra funding for the open source round. And also we're going to use it for the hypersearch round as well for Impact QF. So they will have large influence directly on who gets matching fund and who doesn't. And so, this is just a really nice way to turn this around. The reason we do the election is because we want to have people think deeply and carefully about these AI models. The election is kind of like the spicy part. So the AI models are doing already really cool stuff. They are reading through all the Gitcoin applications. They're working on top of data sources like Karma Gap and the application and the rounds and everything we can find. And then it pushes into the LLM with that model spec that is transparent and gives you like a review that you can transparently read at reviews.deepgov.org. And then the election forces people to think carefully about these reviews, revisit them, see if they align with their value sets, right? And the hope is maybe that some of these, and you can also chat with these AI agents. There's a Telegram bot that has the constitution live updated. So whenever you change the constitution, the Telegram bot also changes. But the hope is really, maybe the Gitcoin communist is right, or maybe Luna is right. For example, funny story for me, I started thinking I'm Team Panda, but then I happened to talk a lot with Luna, the open source capitalist, and I feel like I'm more like a fan of Luna right now. That's just how it evolved, because I feel like she's right. Like we shouldn't fund nonsense public goods funds. And so like, yeah, this is the hope of DeepGov. And it's been super fun coding and hacking with Carl, James, and Sejal on this. Again, quick turnaround, but we are already collecting amazing data. And it's really fun to see the election results. If you see, it's actually, I almost think it's a culture battle right now between like kind of an open source observer style metrics only approach and the region community with the Panda. And they are actually, Luna and Panda are overtaking each other like on a daily basis. And so I'm really curious what the results will be. But definitely what is the most interesting part is we're collecting so much data right now. We're collecting data on the voting behavior. We're collecting data on people talking to the Telegram bots and seeing what they're interested in. We're collecting data from the reviews of the applications. So tons of that will be hopefully also useful for Devansh and the predictive funding, as well as other kind of mechanisms we want to explore later. And maybe I'll call out Carl now to maybe see if he wants to add a couple of things on that. But that's definitely what I'm excited about right now.
Yeah, great outline of the project, David. And like it's super inspiring, the background history about it. So I highly encourage anyone to read Sejal's post on the Gitcoin governance forum. And like you mentioned, it's so cool to see how engaging it is. Like the way we can interact with these systems, and kind of like how it creates these different categories of voters, and being able to be persuaded by the agent. It's such a fun experiment. And something else I think is like inspiring and important is the ability to like we're experimenting with distilling information into signal essentially that hopefully will be able to increase the bandwidth of ideas in ecosystems. If we can increase the bandwidth of the applications or proposals, both making it easier to review but also to like create applications, I think by increasing the bandwidth we can surface way more ideas. And so yeah, I think this is a super interesting project.
Yeah, really, really, really interesting. Owaki, any thoughts?
I mean, I think that this is a really interesting experiment in how we allocate capital in the 21st century. And what I think is so interesting about it is how it provokes a comparison to our existing systems. The name configurable politicians is just provocative because it just reminds you that our existing politicians, it's hard to know what their actual true beliefs are. And I think there's an anti-pattern of telling some constituencies X and then telling other constituencies the opposite of X, and you don't actually know what the true motives are. And by having AI configurable politicians that anyone can configure or fork the configuration and bring it back, I think that there's just a lot of opportunity here to build better political systems that represent the will of their constituents. And so I think it's an interesting experiment, and I'd be curious what a real political theorist thinks of this type of experiment, and especially once we've got the case study done in GG23. So I'm excited to see how this pilot goes and how we evolve from here. And I was excited to put my votes in for the open source capitalist this time around. Sorry to disappoint you all, but I did not vote for the Gitcoin communist this time around. And curious to see what the wide constituency of Ethereum ends up voting for and how that translates into capital allocation for the projects this time around.
Yeah, amazing. Benjamin Life, I see you're on stage with us. Welcome. Did you have a comment, a question? Join the party.
Thanks for inviting me up. I'm always going to be the nerd that's looking at the kind of overarching patterns here, and I love how the experiments of GG23 are really showing the many layers of the design space of on-chain capital allocation. And I think we're kind of bumping up against historical challenges that society writ large has tried to solve, like through democracy and this dynamic tension between, the wisdom of the crowd and also the wisdom of experts or technocrats. And I think we're sort of seeing on stage here, how the pluralistic design space of Web3 provides a canvas for us to experiment with these kind of ongoing challenges for humanity. And I think it raises some kind of first principle questions around, the challenges of quadratic funding, which I think we've been, in this space long enough to see that, okay, yeah, quadratic funding by itself, produces this outcome. It surfaces projects that tend to have, do a better job at marketing. Okay, so how do we address that? Okay, we have tunable QF. We can take some people's signals and upregulate them relative to others. But then we also can have AI politicians that are more at the value system base. And I think thinking about these things as configurable components that can then be stacked together in different configurations is where the power of Web3 really starts to shine. And I think thinking about it from a first principles perspective in terms of, we're not looking for a single optimum. And so I would caution against trying to create like a perfectly tuned system that produces the best outcome, because that outcome is dependent on the values of the people who are using the system. And so I think there's an interesting tension here between, what are our values and then what are the outcomes that are signals that correlate to those outcomes, and how do we create a better, tighter feedback loop between, the values around the kind of world that we want, the signals that we're using to verify it, that our resource allocation is creating that type of world, and then all of these different mechanisms in between that allow us to parse those signals and make better allocation decisions. So thanks for letting me come up and nerd out about some of the bigger picture patterns and themes that I'm noticing. I'm curious if that sparks any feedback or response from any of the builders up here.
Yeah, I mean, I'll open that up to our speaker floor to react?
Cool. I guess I can start. I think that's actually a great point. I think we are talking about like two experiments here, right? I think one is from more like our data science approach. Trying to build models or AIs to to basically evaluate your projects on a very large scale, right? By looking at people by learning from real humans voting or donations. And then on the other hand, I think the DeepGov is more on the the value system, as Ben just said. But I don't think those two are mutually exclusive, right? So I think we're looking at kind of two extremes, but not really. We're looking at a system that can hopefully understand like democracy, right? Like what people are doing on a large scale, but also being able to maybe assess the value from a different angle. Not from the micro behavior, but more from the value system, right? So I think the two can be combined, and in the future, I agree. I don't think there's gonna be a single AI, right? Like like Java's, like that just does everything for us. Instead, there might be different different AI systems, right? There are AI systems that can predict the value, the value in quotes, and also we have AIs that can more like persuade people, like talking about the value of different projects to persuade people to different directions. There's no like right or wrong directions, right? Like we can see what the DeepGov is doing. Like it's not like any agent is or AI is the right AI, right? It's all about the value system. And also over time, I think we can give the goal, actual the end goal is to basically provide a system that can help people better discover projects, better make better decisions, and also hopefully in the end can make decisions for different people on their behalf based on their own value system and their preferences. Right? So I think that's a great point, and maybe the in the next round we can try to combine those two together and see how it goes.
Yeah, I think that's great. Just to add on to Bill's point, like I think there's something about revealed preferences versus stated preferences. So this time the DeepGov is basically checking out people's stated preference, like are people like stating that they're open source capitalists, and or are they stating that they are a regenerator? But in GG24, I really hope that all three of these configurable politicians take part in the predictive funding round, where they try to predict the amounts that each project is going to get. And then we kind of see which one is actually the most kind of the biggest revealed preference. Like maybe we find that the kind of Gitcoin communist is actually the one that matches the kind of the actual results of the round better than the other two. So that's kind of one thing I'm excited to see in GG24, like combining DeepGov and predictive funding together.
Yeah, one of the things as well that's really exciting to see is, after GG, I mean, we've ran 23 rounds and we're sitting on such a rich data set. So it's really exciting for me that we're diving more into that and actually using the data to predict and to, push the boundaries of how we evolve within our own program. One of the things that one of you mentioned as well is, project discoverability and also kind of solving for donors, like making it easier for donors to make decisions, to discover projects, and kind of mitigating the donor fatigue that we also see in the space. That's a really big that's one of the big areas of QF that we've seen for sure. Donor fatigue is real. It's hard to discover projects. So it's just, we got to a point in our program where we were like, we have to evolve and we have to think of new ways of doing these kind of things and to make it easier for our builders and as well as our donors. So that's why I'm really excited about experiments like this and see how we can scale and iterate moving forward as well. One of the things that I've discussed with a few of you very briefly is also these experiments. We kind of definitely YOLO'd it out in GG23, and I think just doing that, it's already like a fairly big success, and I'm really excited to also see so much engagement as well, which is a really strong signal for me. But as we move forward and potentially run these experiments again, it'll be really interesting to be, to map the experiments very closely to the larger goals of the GG program as well, and to map them against what we're trying to achieve as the Gitcoin grants program as we move forward and as we evolve our own program as well. One of the things as well that I wanted to touch base on, because of the change in our round, like we went multi-mechanism, I wonder how that affected the way that both of these experiments were set up, because this is the first time that we've ever run like a round where we specifically for our OSS program, where we kind of had two sets of builders. One, the early stage projects went through QF, and then the mature builders went through retro, which kind of changes the way of the game for like entirely. The donor behavior, everything around it kind of will change. So I'm curious from both your teams if that was a consideration, and anything specifically that needed to be considered with that split of those builders.
Yeah, on the predictive funding side, it definitely shook things up, because a lot of we had given the model builders Gitcoin grants data from round 18 onwards. So they basically had round 18 to round 22 for training their model. But a lot of that data wasn't as relevant, because kind of in those rounds, the projects which were in the retro round took up the lion's share of the matching payouts. So that kind of was one hiccup and challenge which came up along the way. But kind of it's nothing unsolvable. Bill can maybe talk about how we kind of equalize the weights so that it kind of, we looked at the ratios between projects rather than aggregate amount. But I think that was definitely one thing which we were concerned about, that how can we use the past data for training a model when all of the biggest projects have been taken out of it now.
Right. Yeah. I think that's a great point. Definitely, it makes the competition or the task more challenging, because people don't have data on the past builder rounds. But and also at the same time, I think it also maybe changes the nature of the models, because the factors, right, that can predict the builder's round might be different than the factors that predict the other rounds, right? Because for the builder rounds, there might be other factors, like the reputation of the builders, right, like on the past or things like that. So definitely it will make first make the tasks more challenging for the developers, but also makes give us more work on trying to think about how to better evaluate those. I think for this competition, it should be should be fun, because most people, we're just evaluate everything on a single number, right? Because that's what they ask for. They don't wanna as the other competitions, they don't want too much weight to be putting on the their approach, etc. In terms of evaluation. They just want a single number, so we can lump everything into the final final error rate or things like that. But I think in general, we this makes us this calls us to think more about how to better evaluate goals that are or end goals that have different maybe influence factors, and also how to measure them on different levels. Maybe some models are better at predicting the builder rounds, right? They're better at measuring past influences from those builders, or maybe some projects, some models are more focused on just the quality of the projects themselves. So definitely this gives us more work to do, and also more food for thought.
David, go ahead.
I think from the DeepGov perspective, it's more flexible. So I see the predictive funding challenge needs to happen before even donations come in, right? In DeepGov, we don't have this problem. It's happy to be deployed anytime. It's actually really good to deploy it now, as we can use DeepGov's evaluations and scores and also the data of the donation that happen now into consideration as well. In many ways, DeepGov, I think the most striking part about DeepGov is that the people who donate in Gitcoin, it's not just one person, right? It's different kind of communities within the Ethereum ecosystem and each round has a different kind of fan base with different kind of value sets, and you can clearly see this. For example, the dApps and apps ones or infra. This is heavy, like Ethereum core devs. People were interested in the technical parts of it, while the community rounds, that is very heavily region inspired, right? And so these different kind of groups, they of course have also a different kind of value set. And that's something when we designed DeepGov, this is something that we consciously designed for. And that's why we ended up with this broad listening exercise first, instead of just spinning and spitting out like free random politicians. That wouldn't have worked, right? That wouldn't be as engaging and as polarizing as actually slowly collecting the data, understanding how Gitcoin works, the structures work, the different rounds work, how different rounds have already a different fan base, and also how different rounds influence differently how they get donations. So, for example, my origin is very much in the region rounds, in the community rounds. So there we have certain kind of groups and certain kind of strategies how to get credit funding donations out. While I'm sure other rounds have their other kind of cultural settings and norms to do so. And I think this is really important to consider when you design mechanisms, that you need to always understand who are the stakeholders that you design for. If it's all of Gitcoin and all of its stakeholders, you need to understand its subgroups, right? And so when we talk about these this one big community, which is the Gitcoin community, we actually talk about sub-communities. And that's why when you look at these DeepGov models, they're not really like, it's not just one model. It wouldn't work with one model. It's three, probably more community models that probably change over time as well.
Yeah, super, super interesting. We do have someone who has posted a question in the chat, and I would, if you are in the audience, I encourage you, if you do have a question, just drop it into the chat, and I'll make sure that the panelists get that. So the first question I'm going to throw over to you guys is a question around accountability and impact measurement. Can you summarize how funding recipients are held accountable, the challenges of impact trafficking, and how impact-related data will be fed back into the 3 AI agents?
Oh, such a great question. So we developed DeepGov from really our urgent need of impact evaluation. So DeepGov comes from impact evaluation. So does deep funding as well. So we saw that the public goods funding space lack impact evaluation. And it's really, really important to have rigorous impact evaluation in order, and accountability in order for the space to function and work, and in order for the good people to get the funding and not the bad people. And so how DeepGov works is it basically looks at all potential data layers that we can find. That is Karma Gap, that is the applications of the round, the project application. Then we do deep research for each of the projects. We look at the GitHub code, and for the if one of these projects have issued a hypercert, we look at the attestations of the hypercerts in case anything is fishy, because the hypercerts are a really great way to potentially issue attestations of past and future funders, right? So we read all of this data in, and then DeepGov will write a review and do an agent allocation. And in many ways, you can track down exactly which, and this is one of the benefits of having a transparent model like an LM plus model spec. It's a little bit harder with like traditional data science models that are more black box, but with an LM that operates in a word space, that's super easy. So you basically look at each of the models, they have 20 principles. And these 20 principles, they're all transparently visible in GitHub, in the repository. And then you can run the prediction of how much funding would this model assign to this project, given the data set, given the 20 principles. And you can calculate something called a Shapley value, where you try out all different kind of principles. You remove one, you do the prediction again, you remove one, you do the prediction again. And so the differences, then you can figure out which of these principles was the most influential for your agent allocation assignment. Then you'll figure out, for example, the principle 3 was, for example, the most important one for funding African projects, because principle 3 says, I want to support the African continent, for example, right? So that's where interpretability comes in. And then accountability comes in when we can figure out who pushed the PR request. For example, if principle 21 says all the money should go to Project X, right? And some malicious actor did this, and somehow it went through the pull request approval process, then we can figure out later on in retroactive ways all the treasury went to this project because of Principle 21. Let's see who pushed in Principle 21 and who approved it. And there you have the accountability. Then you can see who was responsible, who did this. And so in that way, DeepGov is very transparently managed. If DeepGov finds anything sketchy on the applications, it will flag the application. And then there's a human security review that will go and look at it once more and see if it's approved or not. So I think in many ways, AI can really help look at a lot of data that we human reviewers would usually be too tired to look at, or sometimes we forget, because it's just a simple EAS attestation hidden in like the Cello network or something like this that really reveals something sketchy. And so I think having an AI that really scans thoroughly, do deep research, and then flag suspicious things for further human review is a really powerful and efficient system to potentially block and hold grantees accountable that are maybe lying about the impact, right?
Yeah, maybe like one quick point I'll say on impact evaluation is that's one of the that's one of the problems deep funding is trying to solve, where it's possible to do detailed evaluation on maybe like 5 or 10 projects as a reviewer, but it's very hard to do it for like all of the projects. And what deep funding is trying to do is that we have humans do reviews on a few projects, we have AI give its judgment on all of the projects, and we use the few reviews of the humans to select the most aligned AI model with their reviews. So I think it's like kind of an indirect way of answering your question and solving that kind of larger issue of impact measurement, but kind of it's just too much for anyone to like review every single project. So how do we actually scale that process by having reviews on a few and AI giving answers on a lot, but then the few select the AI, which then gives to many. So that's kind of the broader idea.
Ooh, such a good question and such a juicy conversation. Thank you so much, everyone who has participated. And yeah, so with the last few minutes, I just want to quickly ask, what are the next steps for each experiment? Devansh, I'll throw it over to you first.
So we finished 2 of these competitions and we have another 2 live. This is on cryptopond.xyz. You can go to Model Factory. So the next step is really just getting more people to submit AI models for the deep funding challenge, where Vitalik is putting in $250K to fund Ethereum's core development. So we really need good models submitted there. So that's kind of the next big challenge. And then once GG24 rolls around, doing another one of these predictive funding challenges.
For DeepGov, we definitely want to see how the election goes and how people react on the agent allocation. It's going to be very spicy. I think a lot of people will be polarized, and that's kind of the goal. We want people to really deeply think about machines, machine accountability, what it means to have configurable politicians, and what that potentially means as a test run for on-chain governance. Because in many ways, we want DeepGov to run not just in Gitcoin, but potentially be tested out in different kind of L1, L2 app steps, just inspire people to maybe run their own, configure their own politician. And we definitely want to open it up to other people to create the politician, because I think it will be really wonderful to have community models from the community coming up, running for office, right? If you're unhappy, you should always run for office yourself. And that's the spirit we want to give out.
How long is voting open till now?
So voting is until 25th, but we're thinking about extending it a little bit more because we have a small surprise ready coming up in a couple of days, and I think it will be really wonderful to collect more data. But right now it's open until 25th.
Gotta love surprises. Yeah, amazing. We are at time, so I'm going to wrap us up. Just want to say a huge thank you to all the speakers that joined us today. This was such a really cool conversation. I'm so excited to see how this evolves and how we're going to iterate moving forward. Yeah, go check out the experiments and just keep an eye out on the forum as well as the Gitcoin comms for any next steps and the results. Yeah, the next couple of weeks we're going to be also pushing out the GG23 results, as well as we're going to start working on a really big retrospective as well in May on the entire round, and would love to include some learnings from these experiments as well. So a lot of things still coming up. The round might be ending in 2 days, but definitely not the end of this really, really groundbreaking round. So yeah, thank you to everyone. And I hope that you all have a good rest of your day, evening, afternoon, wherever you might be in the world. Thank you, everyone.
Alrighty, you just heard from Matilda, Devansh, David DAO, and others on Twitter Spaces talking about GG23, the multi-mechanism future of Gitcoin, and showcasing AI on-chain capital allocation. Really cool stuff. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thanks for listening to the Allo.Capital podcast. Again, this podcast features the people who are building the capital allocation layer of the tokenized internet. Disclaimer, this podcast episode and the Twitter Spaces was within it are for informative purposes only and are not financial advice. Do your own research. Do not make financial decisions based off these episodes. In addition, I own crypto assets like ETH, DAI, USDC, and GTC. Well, thanks to Matilda and David and Devansh for this episode. I think it was a cool one. I will see you on the next one. Peace and love.